Morning, everybody. Happy day 2550 of living with a small biological warfare experiment, which is why I sound like this today. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Northwest reporter, Hollie Bone. Good morning, Hollie.
Hello.
This is the first time Hollie's been here. She's been on the scene at St Michael's on Wire for the disappearance of Nicola Bulley for the last 3 weeks. So we're going to talk a lot about that. Now, this is the People's Paper Review. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to cop up something unpleasant later on. Now, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on news that NHS staff who contracted long COVID are being fired while their bosses deny they caught the coronavirus at work, where, of course, they were surrounded by coronavirus. More on that story a bit later on, because first, as we've got Hollie with us, I want to talk about the disappearance of Nicola Bulley, which is now, I think, in its third week, with still no clues as to what happened to her. Now, for those of you who've been under a rock recently, this mum of two was walking her dog Willow and on a work video call when she just disappeared. Her phone was found on a bench, the dog in a distressed state nearby, and the police immediately began working on the theory that she'd fallen into the nearby river and drowned. Now, last week, a private search team announced there was no sign of her in that river, and which is only 2 foot deep where she's supposed to have fallen in. And Nicola's family and friends say it would have been impossible for her to come to harm that way. Attention is now turning to the local area, and in the paper today, it's reporting that Hollie, that as her partner Paul is pictured there tying a yellow ribbon on a nearby bridge, which is to focus attention on the spot where she was last seen, there's been some fresh sightings and some potential new witnesses. So where are we now with things?
Yeah, well, I mean, the case rolls on, doesn't it? I mean, I think that it's baffled the nation. It's got everybody talking about it. Just this weekend, went out and for a meal, and the couple next to me were talking about it. You go into a nail salon and all the women there are talking about it. And I think everybody just wants to know that, what has happened to Nicola Bulley. And watching the interview with her partner, Paul, on Friday evening, he talks about how they consider all of these theories, and every time they just come to a brick wall, because when you think about all the different possibilities of what could happen to somebody if they disappear by a river, you think about the evidence that goes with it. Now, for each different theory about Nicola, the evidence doesn't stack up, and the clues that have been left behind are just completely baffling. And I think that's why it's attracted so much attention. So this week, obviously Paul has called for a wider land search at the end of last week, and so far, the police, Lancashire Police, have only searched, they tell us, a 1 kilometre radius from where her last known sighting was. So I think really their next step and what they'll be expected to do next will be to expand that search and start to look further on land, because Paul says that he's 100% convinced that it's not the river.
Yeah, so they've searched in a 1 kilometre radius around where she was last seen. And that's sort of along footpaths and through fields like this here, that kind of area. They've searched 1 or 2 abandoned houses, I think, that were nearby, but they haven't done house to house, have they?
They've
Or
made
have they?
house-to-house inquiries. They've made house-to-house inquiries, but I think what's really important to remember with this case is that throughout it, they've been treating it as a missing persons case. Now, they have insisted throughout that entire time that for them, there is no suspicious element. There is nothing about this case that causes them to feel concerned that there is a criminal element. I mean, they limited that prospect really quickly, which was, I've got to be honest, it was quite bizarre. You know, everybody that you speak to on the scene, locals, you know, people coming down to volunteer their time to walk the route to try and help find evidence or find Nicola, they're all saying the same thing. And so were the journalists. Why is this path not cordoned off? I mean, it was the first question that I asked in the very first press conference the Monday following her disappearance on the Friday morning. And Sally Riley, Superintendent Sally Riley's response was, we wouldn't invite forensics to the scene, and we wouldn't set up a cordon unless we felt that a crime had been committed. Now, obviously, I don't claim to be an expert with, you know, police proceedings, and I'm not a crime expert, but it does strike me as strange that, you know, clearly this is a rural area, a woman has gone missing, and, you know, all and sundry have come to this this tiny village to help, and that's great. You know, we obviously want it, the family wants as many people to help as possible, but and looking for Nicola as possible. But it does strike me as bizarre that there could be evidence there at the scene which may now be damaged. I think a crime expert said over the weekend that any trace of Nicola that had once been at the scene wouldn't be there anymore, because obviously, you know, so many people visited. Yeah,
That's the thing, and you're right to point it out actually, that if there was some sign, say, of a struggle or something at the scene, then that would start a different police procedure going by the book. Whereas if there seems to be nothing there, then the police procedure by the book is slightly different. But as you say, this is a rural area. There is nothing in Nicola's personal life to suggest that she would be walking out, that she, you know, that she took anything with her, that there was any kind of a problem at home. We know her partner was at home the whole time this was going on, so the usual suspect is not someone is in the frame. And there is plainly something quite amiss that's gone wrong, and it's far too late now for that forensic stuff to be happening. I mean, I'm sure that there'll be lots of people getting into the comments and telling us what they think about all this, and we are interested in the sane ones, so let us know how you think the police investigation is going, and how the story has affected you. But as far as the police handling of things, Hollie, I mean, Mike says here, I may be overthinking it, but it seems odd the police have insisted it's not a criminal investigation. If they didn't know anything, why not keep all options open? Why not treat it as criminal until they know otherwise? I mean, if you need the evidence gathering, which comes when you go into that bit of the police handbook, if you like, then you need to gather the evidence to see if there isn't a crime, surely, as well.
yeah, I think that's it. It comes down to their police handbook, doesn't it? That's why. So what they've done, and what they kind of say to us when we speak to them about it in these press conferences, is that they have ruled it out because they, like I was talking at the beginning, that, you know, you think about the different theories and the evidence that stacks up against them. Well, they're saying that they've eliminated the possibility that Nicola left the riverside because they've got, you know, CCTV, or the exits are locked away from that area, so she would have been seen. I mean, the one exit that she could have taken that doesn't have CCTV is obviously the one that leads out onto the main road, Garstang Road, and they're appealing for those 700 drivers that came through the village to supply any dash cam on the off chance that she did actually manage to get out there. But the thing is that just because they can say that it's very unlikely that she's left the riverside doesn't mean that they can say it definitely. And I think that's what's getting a lot of people's backs up about this investigation, is that, you know, obviously until they've heard from these 700 drivers, and, you know, how can they say with absolute certainty that she didn't leave the riverside? And I think that's kind of the point that Paul is making as well. I mean, there's been such an extensive search of the river, and whilst we know that obviously rivers, and they have a lot of variables, so we can't rule that out either yet, you know, he thinks that it's highly unlikely that she's fallen in the river, given the extensive and intensive search that they've done, and the nature of that river, the way it bends, it's slow moving. So I think, you know, Mike's point is interesting, and I have to agree with him. You know, how can they rule that out? How can they rule out foul play? How can they rule out the fact that she's left the riverside until they've got absolute certainty? And, you know, from what they've told us so far, I don't know that they do necessarily have that.
No, I mean, the perception of the police handling of the whole thing is that seems to be that it's not going well, and the police would probably say, well, that's come because those stupid journalists there saying things about what we're talking about. Now, I've covered a lot of these kind of stories myself when I was on the road, and when the police come out and say we think X happened, as they have in a number of high-profile cases, it's usually because they've got some kind of evidence of X happening. When they come out and say, we think X happened, but we have no evidence that leads us to that, it's just what we think, that's our supposition, it almost always spells or indicates a kind of an internal collapse within the investigation in the way they're conducting it, the way they're thinking about it. You're on the ground, you're speaking to them regularly. Are they happy, I suppose, with the way they're doing it? Are they a bit overwhelmed, perhaps, by the pressure and the attention, and that's leading them to make some mistakes?
It's something that's crossed my mind. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't want to criticize too much Lancs police, because they're sort of on my patch, and I want to kind of keep a good working relationship with them. But ultimately, the thing is that I have thought that, you know, they're obviously, the nature of their patch that they cover, Lancashire, is a very, very rural area. The county, the kind of crimes that they're normally dealing with, we're talking, you know, sort of like the kind of typical farm sort of crimes and rural crimes that you would expect from a big county where a lot of it is just, you know, rolling hills and grasslands. And so I think that when I was watching the first press conference, and certainly the next few updates after that, I was thinking, you know, this is a really interesting case for them. They probably haven't had something like this for a long time. And I think that there was a young chap called Robert Jones, I think was Roger Jones, sorry, who had gone missing 45 years ago. But this is certainly unusual as well for the area. So I do think that there could be a level of feeling overwhelmed by all of this national media attention on Lancashire. And certainly I agree that they have put themselves at risk of pigeonholing themselves, boxing themselves into a theory. And that's something that, you know, other crime experts from around the UK have warned them about as well. You know, they've come out publicly and said that the police here have really put themselves at risk of saying, we think it's this, when later down the line, if new evidence comes to light that it's not, they're putting themselves at risk of really messing it up, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen similar things happen with high-profile disappearances or murders and things. I mean, there was the murder of Jill Dando springs to mind, and the arrest of Barry George, which was definitely the police grasping at straws a bit. And then with the murder of Joanna Yates, which of course happened over the Christmas period when there's very little other news around. And then the arrest of Christopher Jeffries, which went horribly wrong as well. They do sometimes go, that might, the pressure of the attention. It's not just the media now, it's everyone who's out there with a smartphone. All that pressure and all that people who care makes them want to fix it out of the best possible intentions. And then they might grasp at the wrong thing. Scott says, when were these fresh sightings? And Scott's got a point here. So we've got these new witnesses who've come forward sort of during the weekend, it would appear, after some of the recent coverage, and say they have seen some men acting suspiciously. These were two men, I think, on the day before Nicola's disappearance, who are carrying fishing equipment, and they are wrapped up quite warm on a mild day. So someone with hindsight decided that that seems suspicious. And apparently one of the guys was spotted there back again the next morning, which is the day that Nicola disappeared. Hollie, what more do we know about all that? Do we know if, I mean, presumably they're going to want to trace all of these people. They're going to want to trace the men, these suspicious looking fishermen as well, aren't they?
They are, yeah. I mean, I think we haven't heard either anything from police yet about whether they're following up on sightings of a suspicious looking red van as well. I think what's important is that some of these witnesses that have mentioned these things, like the fisherman, like the red van, have reflected on what would otherwise be completely like innocuous, things that they probably wouldn't have noticed, wouldn't have thought about. And then obviously having reflected on the Nicola Bulley disappearance, have remembered things that they thought, actually, maybe I'll just tell the police this in case it turns out to be anything. But what we haven't had yet from police is confirmation that they definitely are looking into this. So, I mean, obviously, when the red van was mentioned last week, it was put to police, but they haven't kind of come back and confirmed that they're following it up as a line of inquiry. I mean, they've said as a general blanket statement that they're open to any information which helps them find Nicola. And despite the fact that they've come out and said that they don't think there's a suspicious element, they obviously are open to anything that can help them, find her, and they're keeping an open mind, is what they've kept saying throughout all of this, to the various possibilities. So it's a bit of a bizarre one from the police perspective again, because, like we were just saying about sort of pigeonholing yourself into a theory, they've kind of come out and said what they think has happened, but they are also sort of counteracting that by saying that they're keeping an open mind and they want people like this who saw things like this to come forward. So I think what remains to be seen for this week, and what we'll really be pushing the police on, is these suspicious sightings. What are you doing with this information? Are you investigating it as an active line of inquiry?
Exactly. Just speaking as journalists, if you go in and have an opinion about how the story ought to be or sounds like to you before you sort of go in the front door, as it were, then you just ask entirely different questions, don't you, than if you think the story is something different. So the whole trick when you're trying to find out what really happened is to make sure you ask all the questions about all the things from all the different perspectives, which is why sometimes interviews go on for hours, and try to form as clear a view of things as you possibly can, which presumably lots of the many police officers down there are going to be trying to do. But if they're working towards one thing, or that's their main hypothesis that they're trying to prove or disprove, then that's where the problems might come in. Now, one of the more horrible aspects of this story is that there are about 1 billion people out there prepared to say what they think happened from the comfort of their armchairs. There are quite a few others who have turned up in the village and are making pests of themselves, Hollie. There's TikTokers and goodness knows what else. What's it like in the village now? What's the atmosphere like with all these people pitching up?
Do you know what? I've got to be completely honest. It's actually, the atmosphere has turned something hostile. And I think that's because you've got to remember that whilst this is a huge case that's attracted, national attention, this is still a sleepy, small little village where people they live there. This is their life, and at the end of the day, these people coming in, almost treating it like a dark tourism hotspot. And there's reports of people bringing their kids and setting up a picnic by the bench where Nicola's phone was found, and it just really, it's not the right, I don't think it's the right tone at all, is it? I think it's just very, it sets a bad taste in the mouth of the locals, the people who are clearly affected by this. I mean, even the people that weren't directly friends with Nicola, they tell us that they, you know, she was a huge part of the village. I mean, she was a member of the PTA at her children's school. She set up all of the mummies nights. You know, she was well known in the village, and also she's a character who a lot of the women there can really identify with. Their children go to that school, they have a dog, they walk their dog, and it could have been them. So this has really affected the local people there emotionally, even if they're not directly connected to Nicola. And for people to just turn up and claim that they're going to try and find Nicola Bulley by, you know, breaking into properties, trespassing. They've broken into a pump station near the river, which obviously, you know, police have already looked at. It just really, really doesn't leave a good taste, like I say, in the mouth of the locals. And I think that's created some hostility towards reporters and towards, you know, people coming and visiting, which I completely understand, to be honest.
Yeah, because they see someone with a camera or a video camera or whatever, and they don't know if that person's a reporter or an idiot. Well, sometimes it's both, of course. And so you know, there's the same hostility, isn't there? And that happens. Now, interestingly, this kind of thing is very recent. This is almost as a phenomenon because, you know, when we were talking earlier on about high profile disappearances and investigations going on, of course the disappearance of Millie Dowler is probably the most like this in a way, in that she just appeared to disappear out of thin air. Everyone was treating that as a missing person for a very long time, and the police investigation got really stuck and went down some very deep and dark rabbit holes and got nowhere near finding Levi Belfield, who had actually snatched her in the road and who and then went on to kill other people because the police hadn't caught him. So, I mean, but when that happened, you didn't have, you know, members of the public turning up in where she disappeared in Surrey and saying, oh, I can fix it. I mean, you had the problems with the News of the World and phone hacking and things like this, but you didn't have, and you haven't had with the Suffolk Ripper that I covered, and you haven't had with Christopher Jeffrey's case. You didn't have members of the public, perhaps someone local who's a bit interested, but you never had a member of the public come traveling a distance to have a picnic where Millie Dowler was snatched. That's very recent. Why do you think that is? Is that just social media that kind of dissociates us from reality in some way, and it
100%. 100%. I think it's all down to social media, actually. I think social media, you know, even in my lifetime, I mean, I'm 27, and when I was you know, 15, 16, it was like Facebook was only really kind of getting started. And now, like, fast forward, you know, 10 years plus, and we've got TikTok, you know, Instagram, Be Real, all of it. There's just an explosion of these social media sites. And I think it's really the sort of the ones where people can share their views and videos and clips like that. You know, YouTube, again, that's come on a long way. And I think that there's a real interest now in sort of video content, which most of the time is great. But we've seen the rise of things like urban explorers and people who will just kind of freely go on to other people's property to make a good piece of video footage that's interesting to their viewers, and obviously that as they amass more followers and you know, the algorithms that more of their videos are being watched, it gets shared, you know, nationwide, and more people are seeing it. And then obviously that, again, you know, maybe people who wouldn't have watched the news, or people who don't maybe wouldn't have watched the Nicola Bulley case unfold on Sky or BBC or in the papers or whatever, now they're seeing it on TikTok, and they think that they can go along and kind of take part of it because of the way that debate is being, the sort of the narrative of that debate, I guess, on social media, which isn't governed by things like IPSO and, you know, Ofcom, which obviously makes sure that we go about things in an ethical and correct, you know, legal way. Do you know what I mean?
And it's laughably, some of the people who will be following that stuff will be saying it's because they can't trust the media, whereas what the person you're following is literally just some bloke in the street. But I'm going to have a Strepsil. Now, we're going to have to move on to the next story, but it's worth, I mean, I'm sure there are people in what Hollie just said there who, like me, because we are 20 years older than Hollie, are going to have to go away and Google about 5 of the things she just mentioned to find out what the hell that was. But thank you for explaining it, Hollie. There's another bit of a conspiracy theory that I ended up on last week, which is that Nicola was a figment of artificial intelligence. That her persona had been created. It was all fake, and Lancashire police were involved in a big conspiracy, trying to terrify everyone into getting microchipped, so the government knew where we were at all time. This is called chipping, apparently. Which I thought at first was a bit dirty, but no, it's just putting a microchip in you. It's quite disappointed to find that out. But there's all kinds of just mad stuff going on about this, and you need to remember there is a family that have lost their mum and their partner and their daughter and their sister, and that could be just about any one of us that have just disappeared off the streets. Let's hope that the police manage to find some proper answers at some point this week. Now, moving on to the next story, back to that front page again, and the awful tales of nurses who have been fired after contracting long COVID. This is when you've caught coronavirus and it has absolutely just sort of wrecked your immune system, and your whole body sort of multi-organ dysfunction kicks in for months, years later. Now, the government brought in employment measures during the pandemic to prevent nurses being fired for long-term sickness, the NHS staff, but that ended last September. And if you don't return to within 6 months, out the door you go. So the first ones are now losing their jobs. And the ones who obviously were working for the shortest periods beforehand with the fewest employment rights have gone first. And inside on pages 4 and 5 is the story of 2 nurses left absolutely debilitated and disabled by, one of them was even a student nurse, Amy there. Another one's a prison nurse, really in a bad state as a result of coronavirus. And normally, Hollie, if you're injured at work, if we were injured working for the Mirror, if we fell over and smacked our heads or whatever, which never happens in a Mirror newsroom, you would get to sue the employer, perhaps, if they've left a wire out or something. But there'll be an incident report at the time. Someone would write down that it had happened. And then if there was a problem later on, you could use that incident report to say, well, this is when I was injured, whatever. So the nurses can't do this, though, can they? What's happened with them?
No, I mean, the thing is what's happened to them is that obviously it's just the complete disdain, isn't it, for the NHS staff. They spend all their time through COVID looking after us, caring for us. Our health is paramount for them, and then when it comes to their health, we just don't seem to look after them really. So yeah, I mean, what got me about this story was that the fact that Rishi Sunak can get a helicopter and a private jet to where he needs to be, find the money for that with taxpayers' money, but we can't even, find the money to keep, our poorly nurses on full pay after they've basically caught COVID, looking after the general population, and it's affected them long term.
Yeah, and it's not like junior nurses earn that much to start with, is it, anyway? So what's really happened here is that because there was a pandemic going on, there weren't any sort of incident reports written at a time that someone was injured, because nurses and doctors were surrounded by coronavirus. It was everywhere they went. There wasn't a lot of PPE, and there certainly wasn't much time to go writing incident reports saying, I think one of my members of staff might have come in contact with coronavirus today, because every day was a coronavirus day, wasn't it? So consequently, there is no incident report for them being injured at work. Therefore, they cannot now sue because they've been injured at work. And suing when you've been disabled as a result of something you've done in your employment normally would be something that would help with your long-term care costs and so on. So those NHS staff who we're all out clapping for are not able to get the protection they need. I'm sure that what will have to happen, that will be happening to thousands of others as well in the next few months, unless there is a rule change for them. And I doubt this government is up to doing that, but maybe they will be forced to it. Let's hope so. I'm sure the Mirror will cover more of that as we go. Right. Thank you for that, Hollie. Thank you for your questions, everybody. We're going to move on to some good news now, because I've done this for half an hour and I'm about to expire. Now, we have found some good news in the world. Here it is. Now, my last Strepsil will just about get us through this. Buckle your belts, everyone, for a return to normality. Energy bills are going down, apparently. That's right. Having jumped first into being stratospheric and then intergalactic in cost, It is now reported that within months, the roller coaster of how much it costs to heat your home will be head back into orbit again. A cut in the wholesale price of gas means that energy suppliers will soon start offering us fixed rates again. Well, most of us on a variable rate now, which means they keep us racking it up. They'll go back to fixed rates, so you will know exactly what you're spending. And because more than one of them is doing it, they will have to compete, and therefore they will start perhaps to bring the price down a bit. Don't count your chickens yet too much, because the cap is still going up to £3,000 a year, which is 500 quid more than it is now. So it will still be pricier than it was before this, Holly, but it is a bit better than it should be, hopefully. Anyway, might come down a teeny amount. Is it proof, do you think, that in the end the customer always comes first?
Well, I think really, it's about time, isn't it? We see all this stuff about the profits of these huge, gas firms, and I think, I mean, the customer needs to come first. I don't think that the customer necessarily always does come first. I mean, look at the state of affairs over the last, few months since the announcement first came out about the price cap lift. But I think it's time that we start looking after people. Some of the horror stories that have come out from this story have just been, they've been devastating, haven't they, really? Old people, there's been people dying of hypothermia. So the customer needs to start coming first now if we're looking after people properly.
Yeah, and fixed rates are going to be beneficial, but of course they need to come down totally. The prices is not just having a fixed rate that you're paying £1 billion a month. You need to know there's going to be less than £1 billion a month. A lot of those stories that we've seen have been people who were terrified of what the bill was going to be, so therefore didn't put the heating on. And all right, we're warming up again a bit now, so we're kind of through some of the worst of it. But there are lots of people who had a very difficult winter. And they need to have some certainty, I would have thought. But it's positive. The prices are coming down for something, somewhere, slightly. There you go. So it's qualified. Right, I'm going to have to go and have some honey and lemon. Thank you, Hollie, for explaining all this to us. Good luck in St. Michael's on Wire this week. Keep the scrutiny of Spotlight and everything on the police for us, and let us know how things go. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Thank you for your comments. Please don't repeat any mad conspiracy theories about the disappearance of Nicola Bulley, because it's very unreasonable. And if you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. Thank you, everyone. And as long as my voice holds out, we will see you again on Wednesday for another edition of the Tom Waits News Agenda. Tatty bye.